In a world within our world, they've created a world unlike any other world.
Dungeons and Dragons. And a game like D&D fuels their imagination and makes them feel special.
The ogre is amused by your joke and allows you to pass.
Dad, I'm just curious. What is it about Dungeons and Dragons that suddenly leapt out at you at age 60?
Dungeons, it'd be the dungeons.
Just what I love about role-playing games is being told exactly what to do.
Me too. You should introduce yourselves.
Hey guys, what's going on? You are listening to 93.3. This is CFRU, and this is the Spellbook. My name is Mike the Birdman, but I'm not alone as I travel through the strange and dangerous world of tabletop role-playing games. I'm joined by my friend, my compatriot, my sage in all things dragons from the Feywild city of London, Ontario, Canada.
Hi there, Tharby Dragons here, and I am Damien.
Yes, guys, so we are back here on the Spellbook. This is the show that is dedicated to the tabletop role-playing game hobby, be it, as the aforementioned, Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, Battletech, Cyberpunk, Call of Cthulhu, Vampire the Masquerade, or perhaps Golden Sun. We have talked about so many games here on the show, but today we are going to be talking about, well, actual dragons for a change. Some of our favorites, some tactics, how to play these guys, some famous dragons throughout history, and all sorts of cool things. But one of the things I want to talk about here off the top of the show is, well, as of this recording, last week we talked about problem players, and that was a very interesting discussion, which basically boiled down to communication and chatting with those around your table, that everybody has a safe, fun, and good time. Now, a lot has happened in the last week or so, and I do want to address it because this is my current show that is airing the most regularly because TWIG is on summer hiatus right now, so whatever. So over the course of the last week, if you've been watching my social media, which is primarily on Blue Sky, but also on Instagram, and weirdly enough, Threads, somehow my stuff gets shared over there, but whatever. I lost a family member this week, and it was a long time part of TWIG. Almost 20 years, actually, almost. Yeah. So if you remember way back in 2009, for those of you that have been long time TWIG listeners, I got a cat named Ayla, named after the Chrono Trigger character, the cave woman you meet back in ancient times. And yeah, Ayla had been with me for almost 19 years. She'd seen me get married. She gave birth to Logan, who was my white cat, who was incredibly dumb, incredibly loving, but incredibly dumb. And she was sort of Dr. Wiley's adoptive mom. Unfortunately, she left us this last week, and it's kind of taken a bit of a hit on me. So if my energy seems a little lower today, I'm very much still in the mourning period. This happened on, as of this recording, on Friday. She made her transition into the great hereafter. So I'm hoping she's there with Dr. Wiley and Logan, batting around one of my D20s that I've inevitably dropped on the floor at some point. And yeah, so that's just what I want to address off the top of the show. Like I said, if I seem a little bit different today, that would primarily be why. Now that I wanted to do the show, I was planning before July 31st, when everything happened. Let's talk about dragons. So this is a topic me and Damien have kind of been circling around for a little while, but it's finding the time right, because literally we could do an entire series on this, and this will be very much baby's first flying lizard show, because there's so much to talk about. There's metallic dragons, chromatic dragons. Our friends over at Hit Point Press just put out a book based on floral dragons, which is actually a really badass read. And there's just a lot to talk about. And I think I'll throw this to Damien in a second, just to give you a very rough idea where I started with dragons. Truth be told, I've never been a big fan of dragons. Like, I remember, like, kind of growing up, people like, oh, this is so cool. Look at this red and green dragon. I'm like, okay, neat. But I grew up reading Anne McCaffrey novels. So I read Dragonflight and Dragon Song, and dragons were kind of a mean to an end. And yes, in sort of the Dragon Song trilogy, they were a little bit more because they were fire lizards. Either I'm getting into the weeds. It wasn't until Skyrim came around in like 2011, I want to say is when Skyrim came out, and you saw the great dragons like Parthenax and the Dragonborn himself and Tamriel making dragons a legitimate threat, although for some reason they would land and use their tails at you more than anything else. Still, that's how I got into dragons. What about you, Damien?
So I'm just gonna put this out there, and it's going to date me quite a bit. My first dragon was Falcor.
Oh, I
Um,
forgot about Falcor. Yeah.
yeah. So, like, I've been like in and around dragons have been in and around my fictional life for quite a while. I think the first like TTRPG dragon that I had ever faced was in a Palladium RPG game in like the 90s. But yeah, like I don't know, dragons for me have always been kind of one of those things that I've always kind of found them a bit interesting as like a weird unintentional counterpoint to you, Mike. As like think about it. Like elves, they are a long-lived species in basically any sort of fiction or mythology or legend that you happen to come across. Dragons are always ancient. They're synonymous with a creature that'll last a millennia and be alive, and all of the knowledge and wisdom that can contain. Well, knowledge and wisdom on the positive end, uh, malice and pettiness on the negative end. And I don't know. I always thought that was kind of interesting.
You know, it's funny you mentioned TTRPG dragons because I completely forgot about this. So, pardon me. So in the I guess late 90s, I used to have a really good friend of mine. And we used to play a lot of Shadowrun. And Shadowrun obviously has a very famous saying in its lore: never cut a deal with a dragon, or never deal with a dragon, and never trust an elf. And I remember in one of the early adventures that my one character did, I ran into a dragon named Lothwire, who ran the Satyr Krupp Corporation, who is one of the largest corporations in the world of Shadowrun, where he literally bought 51 controlling percent interest in this company with a lump of gold from his draconic horde. And he's always seen as like this master manipulator, this person who's always 3 steps ahead of you. And Shadowrun did a lot of heavy lifting to integrate dragons into its world, but I never felt like there was more than 2 big guys in that space. There was the aforementioned Lothwire, but there was also another dragon who was a Western type style dragon, and he was supposed to be a good guy, and he ran for president. And if I recall correctly, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think he presented his human form as a middle-aged black man. And for some reason, now that I think about this a little bit more, and again, I'm probably getting some of the details wrong through the haze of memory, I always kind of pictured, when I look back on those memories, I think about Dunklazan looking like Barack Obama for some reason. And the big thing was, dragons are supposed to be immortal, almost virtually nigh unkillable, especially in the world of Shadowrun. Like, you got things like juggernauts, these giant armadillo things. You need like an attack helicopter to even make one sneeze at you. But the big deal in Shadowrun was Dunklazan died. He was assassinated outside of the Watergate or one of the big hotels in Washington, D.C. the night of his inauguration, which kind of channeled this whole big meta crisis in the world of Shadowrun where the dragons can die. Well, what does this mean? We elected this person to be this bridge between humanity and something virtually unknowable. What do we do now? And I always thought that was a fascinating way to approach dragons because I'd never seen a dragon humanized like that. Like you mentioned Falcor. I think back of other fictional dragons you and I would have seen in media at that time. I think of Smaug. Yeah. Because at that time we had the Ralph Bashki Lord of the Rings, which is a very interesting interpretation of those movies, which they're actually worth watching. I will say that. Maybe we'll do like a Lord of the Rings show at some point in the future. But I had a really fun time watching those movies. And Smaug always came across to me as like, I wouldn't say an idiot, but like, you're way overconfident to be talking crap against people. There's armies outside your door, and you're pretty confident right now. And he got his ass kicked by like, I think Aragorn or I don't know, some ranger shot something at him and whatever. I can't remember the precise details. That's how little it stuck with me. But when you mentioned Falcor, that is one of, I think, pop culture's most underrated dragons because he was a subspecies called a luck dragon. And I always found that to be incredibly interesting because dragons have no universal design basis when you kind of think about it. Because you look at Western dragons, like you think of your Smaug, your Thembershad, Dunklazan, I guess Parthenax from Skyrim. But
all
Falcor,
all of the dragons from Skyrim, I think, would be the most relevant reference.
Yeah, and when you think back to how Falcor's designed, he's more long and I wouldn't call him spindly, but very long, for lack of a better descriptive term.
Serpentine.
Serpentine, perfect. That's more of an Eastern dragon design. So think more of like your Chinese dragon, your Japanese dragon with multiple limbs and wings that may not necessarily be obvious if they're there at all. And yeah, it was just a different design philosophy. And not many people talk about Falcor these days. Like there's actually a very famous YouTuber who I'm like kind of friends with, who took Falcor as his design for years. And that's the only person I'd seen really reference him in the modern day. And I even feel like now dragons have been, I don't know, I'd almost call them neutered in some ways. And what I mean by that is Skyrim is actually probably the most culturally relevant example of this because I don't think they portray dragons in a particularly favorable light. And what I mean by that is their tactics are questionable at best. Their intelligence seems to be boiled down to me, noble creature, must defend people, or me, sadistic evil monster, only care about gold, rar. And I'm thinking, that's not how I pictured these creatures. And it's always kind of thrown me for a loop because, like, when you think about, as you mentioned, Skyrim, Damien, dragons should be up in the sky flying, strafing us with breath weapons, not landing and doing bite and claw attacks where they can get in range of my two-handed greatsword and presto the wizard over here with like magic missile. You know, it doesn't seem like they would fight that stupidly. And I've always had a reinterpretation of dragons, or more like a thought process of like, these creatures deserve better. These alpha predators, in some cases, deserve a little bit more respect on their name, if you will. But speaking of putting respect on their name, it's time to take a break here on the show. So this has been the Spellbook with myself, Mike the Birdman. I'm joined with Damien, Magical Hack Morphit, and we are talking dragons. But we're going to take a break here on the Spellbook, and we will be back right here on Guelph's Community Radio, 250 watts of power. We'll be back right after this.
Hey, this is Connor Morand, and you're listening to CFRU 93.3 FM in Guelph, also available at cfru.ca.
Everything is gone, but
Welcome back to the Spellbook right here on 93.3 CFRU, Guelph Community Radio, as we talk about dragons. And like when we were getting ready to go into the break there, Mike was talking about like dragon tactics and stuff like that. Now, just to touch on the Skyrim thing, that's game balancing mechanic. Actually, really all of it is game balancing mechanics.
It's true, yeah.
Because like truly, if you were to run a dragon intelligently, like
The player would stand no chance.
yeah, like the dragon would not fight you in their lair because yes, lair actions, yada yada yada. But no, they're gonna fight you on the open field. They're gonna be flying, 120 feet up in the air, where your bow and arrow is a annoyance.
Disadvantage. Yeah, maybe to hit. Maybe.
It's an annoyance at best. And oh hey, I can breathe fire on you. I'm gonna strafe you and breathe fire and fly back up to safety. And honestly, even looking at it from a GM perspective, who would be the one who'd be doing these strafing runs, it's kind of boring.
It's true. I mean, I remember one dragon fight I ran with the group you're playing with, Damien, in our current game. They ran a dragon, and I'm like, okay, they're gonna fight in the lair. I know, strike one, but I'm not having this dragon fight stupidly, because a lot of things people forget is, at least in Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder, anyway, in a lot of fantasy settings, dragons are incredibly powerful spellcasters. So they can mix and match up with your powers. Like they can cast invisibility, they can cast polymorph, they can do all these things that can mess with you. But I decided, like, okay, so we're fighting in this cave that has a fairly high ceiling, so the dragon can move around if it wants to fly back out into the desert. This was a blue dragon they were fighting. I was like, okay, I want to make this fight feel different. It's not going to be, I'm just going to breathe lightning at you. That will happen, but I want to do something different. And the tactics I used in that instance was, the blue dragon was incredibly arrogant. Basically, how dare you come into my home, and how dare you think you can speak to me like I am one of your peers. So what my dragon would do is, because this particular dragon lived in sand, and this will kind of lead into our next little bit of a talking point, our favorite dragons. Mine is the blue dragon, the blue and black. The blue dragon I like because it breathes lightning, but I like the fact that its natural habitat is the desert. I find this biome incredibly fascinating. So when you think of desert, you think of sand, obviously. So in this cave, I remember watching something on YouTube years ago where people would go to the beach in real life and they would catch lightning. What do I mean by that? People would plant like a pole into the sand, and when sand gets hot, it turns into glass. So what my dragon did is he turned the floor of his lair into glass and covered it with sand. Underneath that sand glass layer was lava traps. So my dragon's like, oh, by all means, come on in. And then when these monkeys started getting up in his face, he started shattering the floor. Yeah. So he's fine. He can land anytime he wants, and he can just, restore the floor anytime with magic. But my players couldn't. So what he did after he took up the floor, he would grab them, fly up 120 feet in the air, and drop them. And one of my players that we play with, let's call him Rick, had the capacity as a species called a Shardar Kai, has an ability called Blessing of the Raven Queen, which allows him to teleport 30 feet a couple times per day. That saved his ass, because he was able to, if he would get dropped, when the round would come back to him due to falling rules, he would just teleport back onto the back of the dragon. But that trick's only going to work like 4 times at his current level. And I thought that was incredibly a fun way to play them while using the environment as a weapon. What about you, Damien? What's your first favorite draconic type?
Ooh. Okay, so like you, I have a couple. So For just like normal dragons, I would have to say black and red. Black because they look cool. Like and I'm talking like the third ed version, not the more up to date version. Like it was described as because of the fact of like the way that they're, and I think it was basically kind of described because of their breath weapon is they looked like skulls.
Yeah.
Like
Skull
their
dragon.
heads yeah, their face looked like a skull. And it was very they like the whole acid thing is rather awesome. And red dragon. Mainly because of the fact of from a GM standpoint and the things that you can actually do with them, especially back in the 3 and 3.5 era. Other than that, because I like me some magic in my fantasy, Dracoliches.
Yes.
Yeah, Dracoliches are fun.
I mean, when you mentioned black dragons, the big thing that took me onto them as one of my favorite types is I love to play with biomes in my games. And I find, and I I don't know if this is a universal experience, but I feel like a lot of D&D path, basically anything fantasy adjacent tends to happen in like temperate climates. And what I mean by that is it seems like every adventure happens either in New Zealand or Western BC. It's a lot of forest, it's a lot of mountains, but you don't see a lot of variety in where you are, right?
Which is
And
super unfortunate.
yeah, like that's one thing in my games. I try to give you Nat Geo. I want you to see the world. With Black Dragons, I love the idea of a swamp. And from a narrative standpoint, I love the fact that I can describe something as fetid and rotting vegetation, the stinging of thousands of insects, rotted logs and waterlogged, and even quicksand you can use. But the thing that attracts me to dragons, black dragons in particular, I just realized phrasing, but I think
Giggity.
about I think about their breath weapon, and as you had alluded to, acid. I'm a huge fan of the Aliens franchise. Like xenomorphs are one of my favorite fictional monsters, so much so I've crossed them into D&D a few times with I'd say a fairly good degree of success. And I love the idea of describing someone being hit by acid. And I always think back to like Mortal Kombat 2's Deadpool stage when someone gets knocked into the acid pit and it dissolves their skeleton. Or there's a really great movie that came out in the early 90s, directed by Brian Yunza. It's an anthology horror movie called Necronomicon Book of the Dead. It's a very cool H.P. Lovecraft anthology story. And there's a moment where David Warner, very famous horror actor, dissolves and literally liquefies. And I've always kind of used that as my visual reference when I'm describing someone being melted, or when Drake from Aliens gets splashed with the acid in the hive battle and he, melts basically before Vasquez can save him. And I've always loved that. Like the fact that dragons have so many different types of breath weapons available to them. Like red has fire, which is, pretty standard. Green has poison, which can be incredibly devastating depending on how you describe that. Black acid. White has frost and cold damage, which again can be, you think of like a cryomancer like Sub-Zero, for example. You have that. Blue has lightning, which I always thought was kind of an interesting one. What does gold do? I'm not
Gold-
100%. Yeah.
Gold is fire. So all of the like the chromatic and metallic dragons basically are kind of lockstep with one another because like in D&D, they like the chromatic dragons are the good dragon, or sorry, no. The metallic dragons are the good dragons, so your gold, silver, bronze, copper, and brass. And then on the other side, you have your red, blue, and these are not going to be in the same order. Red, blue, black, green, and white. And they essentially kind of covered all of the 5 like major damage types. Is I think kind of what they were going for there with that. Was to kind of have those represented in draconic form to, I don't know, maybe make them seem more like forces of nature, which truly that's how a dragon should be approached, in my opinion, as a GM.
Yeah, because like you want your dragons to feel powerful, like they're not quite a part of the natural world. You want them to be sitting slightly above it as the apex of what power looks like in these games. And I've always had, I don't know, an observation where a lot of neophyte GMs and dungeon masters will be like, well, the game's called D&D. They've got to fight a dragon. And they have, oh, here's a young wormling or here's a young dragon. And they play the dragons like they're pants on head stupid. And I've never felt a dragon, at least in any of my games where I've been a player, feel like this extinction level event. Like, I'm not saying I'm going to be fighting the Terminator with like a BB gun, but I should feel like that. I should feel like this is really hard. Has to be something there. I can't win this on luck alone. I need to have strength. I need to have tactics. And you're right. I'm going to need to be a little bit lucky here, but there has to be a plan. And when you look at the chromatic dragons, I think they're such wonderful examples of power. Like, I love the idea. Like, I actually use a red dragon as a bad guy in one of my games where he's died, but his cult is trying to bring him back as a Draco Lich. And I love the idea that there's this eternal greed and lust for power. Not even so much so he wants to control material wealth. That's above his station, but it suits him. He's like, no, I command life and death itself, and not even the ravages of time shall keep you not under my control. And Draco Liches is something I think is so interesting because it's something I never heard about till probably about 10 years ago. The fact that dragons can become undead, that they can become these literal, creatures like a lich. And for those of you that don't know, a lich is a wizard who has passed into undeath and is remarkably hard to kill. Unfortunately, the best fictional example of this outside of role-playing games is from the franchise that shall not be named, Voldemort, because his soul is split into so many different pieces. In D&D, we would call that a phylactery. In that franchise, they call them Horcruxes. And as a small aside to this, I always found it really weird. I remember when my wife was reading this series in the mid 2000s and she's telling me about all this, and literally, Damien, like, it was like the light bulb moment above my head popped, and I was like, hey, wait a second. Are you talking about a lich?
Yeah.
And my wife's like, no. I'm like, do you even know what a lich is? And we both describe it back and forth. He's like, that's a lich. He's like, oh, that's a lich. And it was just like, for a lich, you're kind of stupid if you can't take over a high school. But that aside, and I guess more now we have representations of liches in popular media, especially in something you can watch right now. Kind of pseudo, I would call Vecna from Stranger Things a lich, but not in the D&D sense. He borrows a name and shares similar traits, but functionally not the same. So we're going to take a break here. We'll have to talk about liches on this show first and undead. Hey, that's maybe a Halloween show. So we're going to take a break here right here on the Spellbook. This is CFRU 93.3 in Guelph, Ontario, Canada, on the University of Guelph campus. We will be back, guys, right after this, right here on the Spellbook.
Let's Get Lost is the radio program that comes to you right here on CFRU 93.3, Tuesdays, 8 till 9:30. Scott's your host for 90 minutes of music that we love, jazz-related stuff, new releases, old favorites, hopefully music that you'll find a place in your heart for.
Okay, everybody, let's get lost.
Welcome back to the Spellbook, right here on 93.3 CFRU Guelph Community Radio. But yeah, so we were talking about dragons and Dracoliches and all sorts of fun stuff before the break there. And one of the things that I think would be interesting, because like with dragons, and I'm gonna like reference D&D specifically here. Golden dragons are essentially the red dragon counterpart in that they're lawful good to the red dragon's chaotic evil. Now, what do you think would happen if a gold dragon got turned against their will into a Dracolich? What sort of a villain do you think that would make?
I love this idea because gold dragons are seen to be these very regal protectors of good and all that as well. But if you have something that corrupts that, I could see this being a very interesting dragon where you see this Dracolich, while being turned into a lich is an incredibly traumatic experience only meant for the most evil of beings because it literally involves ripping your soul out and using people. A gold dragon turned into a Dracolich, I could see that being turned into a tyrant. And what I mean by that is, what if someone took lawful good and cranked it to like 12? And what I mean by that is, oh, you have lied. The punishment is death, because they're literally so into their tenements of what is good and what is righteous. They take it to the nth degree. Oh, you stole because your family's starving? Fine. Your family will feed, but I'm taking your hands because you stole. I could see this being I could see a vengeful wizard doing this to a rival dragon, and just the machinations that would require this to happen. Or if a dragon, one thing I've done with this, and I don't think I've done this in your game, so if I accidentally spoil a plot point 6 months from now, I'm sorry. I have this dragon who's actually pursuing lichdom because he knows there's a threat coming in like a couple thousand years. And he thinks he's the only one who's smart enough to deal with it. So he's like, look, I'm not going to be around in a couple thousand years, but if I do this, I will be, and I can protect you. So you have to let me do this. So yeah, I could see a dragon doing this, thinking for the right reasons, but being ultimately corrupted because maybe they saw some horrible Terminator Skynet future where the entire world ends, and the only way to do it is to literally make a deal with unlife.
Yeah, like that would be a very it would be an interesting way to provide the motivation for that sort of villain, because yeah, becoming a lich is going to corrupt even the most stout-hearted of, well, there again, that's a different episode in and of itself, because apparently there are like good liches. At least there was back in something like 2nd edition. I remember seeing a video not too long ago, but that's getting off on a tangent.
Yes.
So one of the reasons why I'd kind of suggested dragons as a topic is, and we kind of touched on it earlier, is tactics. One of the things that I think a lot of people, and I think part of this is because a lot of people playing right now, their main, their first edition of D&D was 5th edition, which is where a lot of the chromatic dragons, their spellcasting feature became optional. Whereas back in like 3 and 3.5, I think the only dragons that didn't have like innate spellcasting were the white dragons, because they're the dummies. Using things like you'd mentioned polymorph or alter self, or giving dragons character classes. Yes, that's shied away from nowadays in the current edition of D&D, but think about this. A dragon with a flavored wild shape that lets them turn into a human. With wild shape, if I remember correctly, when you get reduced to 0 hit points, you get all your normal hit points back, and you just revert back to your original form, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, there might be some spillover, but it's if you're a dragon, it don't matter.
Yeah, exactly. So think about this. You have, your big bad evil dragon. Or rather, you have your big bad evil guy, and your players don't know it's a dragon yet. Phase 1 of the fight, they're just fighting some elf-looking dude who is surprisingly strong. And then they reduce its first health bar to 0. Surprise stage 2 dragon fight, anyone?
That is a tactic. I love this idea. And I kind of pulled this on you guys with the Dreamstalker giving a surprise second health bar. But that is such a good reveal. Like you think you're fighting some wizard or some sorcerer or whatever. And suddenly, oh, look, evil green dragon right here on your doorstep. I love that idea. Because, like, a dragon fight should feel memorable. And when you look at the different types of dragons, you can kind of get a feel for how they should fight, how they should react. Like for me, when I run black dragons in particular, the rare time I get a chance to use them, I like using them as ambush predators, where they'll use the water of the swamp or the bog, and they'll slither under the water, and they'll come up behind you and just launch this fire hose of acid in people's faces, or they'll use it as scare tactics. Like if they don't want you coming into their lair, they'll find the most powerful predator that lurks in their space. They'll melt the carcass and leave it on display. Because you can also use their personality traits, their suggested personality traits. Like black dragons in particular are known to be jerks. And I'm using that word. That word's doing a lot of heavy lifting. Let's just say they are a-holes. And you want them to be cruel. You want them to be sadistic. Not sadistic like the Joker, because the Joker does more chaos for the chaos' sake. I picture more someone like... I was going to say Dr. Doom, but no, he's more of a blue dragon, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Almost like a Victor Zsasz from Batman, the guy who carves his kills on his skin. I want someone to be that sadistic, but very intelligent. And I love the idea of a black dragon just making sure this is my territory. And if you set so much as one atom over that line, I will make sure you not only pay, but everybody you've ever loved and anybody who's even so much as whispered the first syllable of your name pays with you. I love that idea of making them that dangerous. What are some of your favorite tactics with your favorite draconic subtype?
So one of the things that I've always liked doing with dragons is like they are the campaign capstone. Like if I'm putting a dragon into my game, they're going to be the thing that, this is the apex of the story, or is going to be related to the apex of the story. So you're not going to see said dragon until, essentially the last minute. Like I said, like I'm a big fan of using the whole, second surprise health bar on things, because it subverts expectations, and when I'm a GM, I like to see my players squirm a little bit. I'm not adversarial. I just like to see how they deal with new and surprising situations.
Yeah, I'm very much the same way.
But like, as far as tactics go, once you finally do get past all the minions and traps and things like that, I like playing a dragon as an aerial threat that you have to figure out a way to deal with. Like, as a monster, they're just as much a puzzle as they are an adversary.
Yeah, because you look at how a dragon is designed, and particularly in 5th edition, a lot of dragons have good saving throws, but they may not have the best armor class sometimes. Like, you're usually looking at like 19 to 21. That's, I wouldn't say easy to hit, but reasonably you could at like probably 5th level or above. You can hit these things. Whether you can kill them is an entirely different question. But yeah, like, you're right. A dragon should be looked at as a puzzle to be solved, and not necessarily as Conan and, Aragorn going to be your solution to that. Sometimes you need to lean on Gandalf and presto the wizard here.
Yeah. Sometimes you need that black arrow.
Yeah, oh my God, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because you think about this as a puzzle, that's a puzzle piece. I have only ever encountered people using specialized dragon fighting weapons in my games. Literally, I can think of maybe twice. And I did it once, where I gave them 2 arrows of dragon slaying, because I'm thinking, I'm going to give you a chance to do massive damage, but can you hit a moving target? It's an option. Here's my get out of jail card in case you need it. The other time, you think to the most famous setting in D&D, arguably, Dragonlance. And what does that mean? Well, a dragon lance.
Yeah.
That's how you fight these things.
Those books were awesome.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't see many people using specialized weaponry. It's always like, okay, I've got my +2 flame brand. I've got my magic bow, but I never see specialized weapons. I almost never see players coordinate proper tactics. It's almost when they see the dragon, they poop their pants and all logic goes out the window. And it's hard because you want your players, like you as the GM, and you hit it right on the head. We're not adversarial, but we're not going to hand you the win either. We want you to think and figure it out. And if you die, well, hopefully there's enough left of you to resurrect. But if you're smart, you can use this opportunity to do hit and run tactics. And what do I mean by that? You can run reconnaissance on these dragons, figure out how they fight. Because at the end of the day, the dragon is a thinking creature like you. Now, it may be playing literally 5D chess, but everybody eventually makes a mistake. And there's always some way to counter it. Like, for example, just kind of listening to how you and I kind of deal with dragons, I have the environment as my environmental. You can beat the dragon. Yes, you're on his turf, but you can use that against them. Like, for example, my cave example. And I remember this because you told me this story about 2 weeks before I ran this encounter. And you were telling me about how you use the earthquake spell to deal with something.
Yeah.
And one of my players, I kind of hinted at them, you're inside a cave. What does my t-shirt say? And they're like, what are you talking about? And I had a t-shirt that was literally Grumpy Cat behind a Dungeon Master screen where it says, rocks fall, everybody dies, the end. And they're like, oh. And they're like, yeah, use the environment. Sure, he can fly, but let's see him dodge a 2-ton boulder. And I thought it was pretty clever. So speaking of clever things, we're going to talk about more tactics and more awesome draconic stuff. This has been the Spellbook. My name is Mike the Birdman. That is Damien Magical Hack Morphit. And as we come back in the closing 10 minutes of the show, we're going to talk more things like a roar and everything else. So we will be back right after this, right here on the best station in Guelph. And if you disagree with me, let's prove it in court. We'll be back right after this.
Hi, my name's Karen, and you're tuned into Guelph's volunteer-programmed campus and community radio station, CFRU 93.3 FM.
Welcome back to the Spellbook right here on 93.3 CFRU Guelph Community Radio. So, with dragons and the tactics that you and I, as fairly experienced GMs, use, what sort of a suggestion would you give to like somebody who wants to run their first dragon for their table?
Ooh, well, my first question would be, do you want your dragon to be a physical threat or a social threat? And because the two do need to exist together. There does need to be a physical threat and a social threat, but it depends. If you want to do a physical threat, that's pretty easy. Like, do you want to waste your players or do you want to nickel and dime them? And that's mostly relying on breath weapons and the strafe tactics. I tend to err people to use dragons as a social threat, honestly. I want you to figure out, find your fictional bad guy that you really like, and then pretend they're a dragon, for example. And this will be, I could see this, I'm going to give you a fictional character, and you're going to tell me what draconic subtype you think they are. So I'm going to pick Tony Montana from Scarface, the Cuban crime lord from the movie, who wields money and power, but is also incredibly paranoid and eventually pushes away his allies. What draconic subtype is Tony Montana?
Blue dragon. 100% blue dragon.
Yeah. See, with me, if I'm running Tony Montana as a blue dragon, he's going to have an army with him. And he's not necessarily using his army to fight his battles because, he wants to avoid getting his claws dirty. No, it's because you're not worthy enough to fight him. And I love the idea of having these draconic generals serving them, because I think they're serving a higher purpose. And that's a cool way to do it. So when I run this as a social thing, Tony Montana respects many things, money and power. And that's something you can use in your games too. Now, all dragons at the end of the day, do they want to eat you? Not necessarily. They may want to work with you, quote unquote. They're probably using you 100%.
Yeah.
But you can have it so, oh, if I work with this blue dragon, he promises he'll give me this. All I have to do is be loyal. Okay. And now you're working for the cartels. So I love the idea of running a dragon like that, because dragons also, how do you think dragons get rich? It's not just always, hey, I'm going to go plunder King Leonidas's horde or whatever. Some of these dragons are business people, criminal enterprises. Like, I know a beholder in D&D. There's a guy called Xanathar, and he runs an entire thieves guild along with a goldfish, which, long story, but it's really funny. I love that idea. Like, make these dragons not necessarily hide behind layers, but if you want to get to the top, if you want to get to Heisenberg, you're going to have to work your way up, and you're going to have to be smart in how you approach it, because a social threat can be one of the most rewarding experiences if you figure out the crime puzzle, so to speak, or how to get to them. And if you can engage them in social combat, maybe you can outsmart them there. Because again, martial prowess, awesome. You're not hitting me if I'm 300 feet in the air, but if you can outsmart me, I don't know what I can do against that. So that's up to you as a player. What about you?
Okay, so I'm going to actually kind of keep on with the whole blue dragon idea here.
Mhm.
How I would run one of those. Like, blue dragons are arrogant. They think they're better than anything else. I think if I was to run one as a social threat, I think I would have it. They wouldn't necessarily be running like a thieves guild or something like that. They would be the king of a desert or the monarch, however, whatever title you want to give them, of a desert kingdom.
Okay.
They're not living under the sands. They're living at the top of the hierarchy. And the people serving under them don't even know they're
So like a pharaoh who happens to have all. That's a clever idea. I like that.
Yeah, and you could flavor it culturally however you wanted to, really. But yeah, so they're, this society's leader that's, maybe they're pretending that they're, their descendants as they go down through their, quote unquote bloodline, because they know that adventurers, if they hear about, this king that's been living for 1,000 years or so, they're gonna come sniffing around. So we're gonna Highlander this. If you know the reference, 2 thumbs up.
That's right.
But yeah, we're gonna Highlander this, and I'm gonna be my own descendant. And this kingdom has been ruled through, the same bloodline for however many generations, and they all look very similar to one another, which is strange.
Yeah, because with alter
think?
self, yeah, my God, that's clever. Damn, playing against you someday is going to be fun.
And that's the thing is with that, you then, as the party, you not only have to go up against this dragon that you may not even realize is a dragon. You have to go up against a city of people who owe this dragon their prosperity, owe this dragon their lives. How is that populace going to fight against somebody who is coming after the leader who they, owe everything?
There was a game that a friend of mine ran many years ago when they were children. And I always thought he did this in a remarkably clever way. And he used one of D&D's big villains, and it was Strahd von Zarovich, a vampire. But what he did was something so clever, and he kind of did it adjacent to what you're talking about. He presented Strahd as this, I may be a villain, but do you see these people being harmed? And he said this, and it's always kind of stuck with me. It's like, this may be a horrible place to live, but the trains run on time. And I'm thinking that's a really clever way to use a dragon. I love that idea. Now, as we begin the closing moments of the show, what is the one dragon subtype you've never encountered or ever used? I'll give you a moment to think. One dragon I've never used is the green dragon. And the green dragon is the forest dragon, the one who breathes poison. And I can't recall much of their personality type. I want to say they're incredibly conniving liars, if I recall correctly.
Sounds about right.
I've always found their breath weapon to be weak. But when you think about poison gas, to draw upon historical examples, think about the World War I trenches with mustard gas, or when other people have suffered chemical attacks. And it's only really recently I've started to put a little bit of respect on the Green Dragon's name, because if you think about it, one thing I've done, and you've actually seen me do this in your games, I like to use a lot of environmental hazards like poison spores or gas clouds and stuff like that. And I could see a green dragon using that to his or her advantage too. And that's something else too. You see a lot of dragons are always assumed to be he, him. I come across the rare female dragon, and I think there's interesting things there. But then again, maybe dragons are above such things as gender, because I never hear about anybody in a game, and maybe this would be a cool plot to explore when you forget we've had this conversation, about a mated pair or how do dragons spawn, because it's very different in Dragonlance with how the draconic species propagates and dragon eggs and all that stuff. You don't know. But yeah, I've never used a green dragon ever. I've also never used a white dragon other than like a really tough mini boss fight against like a young dragon, because I'm like, I want to use Sub-Zero, but Sub-Zero that flies. What about you?
So literally any of the gem dragons. Mainly because they're a newer creation that came about with either the edition that shall not be named or 5th edition. And it's just they're a cool concept. I like the fact that, like, you know, their scales are very gem-like and crystalline. They're cool and all. They just, I don't know. For me, they don't scratch that dragon itch. I've never had the chance to toss them into a game that I've run.
Yeah, because it's just, I mean, like you, a topaz, an emerald, a ruby. That sounds awesome. What does that mean? Okay, the best example is, and again, I'm just because this is so fresh in my mind. There's a line in Spider-Man No Way Home, and Peter Parker is talking about the Avengers, and Toby's like, "That's great. What is that?" And that's what I thought about when you said the gem dragons, because they look and sound awesome, but can you tell me what any of their power? I know one of them has like a psychic attack. That's all I know. And oh my God, you know what, Damien? This is going to have to be a topic we're going to have to come back to, because dragons, it's such a deep and rich species of monster. Like, I talked about floral dragons. There's a book by Hit Point Press that came out last year, and it's still in print this year. I think it won an Emmy recently, and it talks about floral dragons that literally come from flowers.
Yeah.
And you know, it's such an incredible thing. And there's so many things we just didn't talk about. There's mechanical dragons too. There's all sorts of crazy things in the world of fantasy.
The ancestry that time forgot, the half dragon.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about that. Yeah, there's so much to talk about, but we're going to leave you here on the Spellbook today. And if people wanted to get a hold of the show, Damien, how would they go about doing that?
Oh, it would be very easy. It would be thespellbookshow@gmail.com.
So we will be back next week. Next week, we're going to be talking about, and get your pencils ready, guys, because I'm giving you homework, but I think you're going to like it. So next week, we're going to be talking about player buy-in. If I give you this to read, can you please do the required reading? And considering we are broadcasting from a university campus, think of this as your lecture that you want to attend. Yes, it's 8 a.m. on a Monday, and much like Garfield, we hate Mondays. So hopefully you guys have had a fantastic time with us here on the Spellbook. So for the Spellbook, we have been.
I am Damien Magical Hack Morphet.
My name is Mike the Birdman. And until next time, folks, be excellent to each other, and we'll catch you next time right here on Guelph's Community Radio and thisweekingeek.net. This has been the Spellbook.
It's not enough. We have a gallery of villains to look out for, but now we could be infiltrated by a shape changer. I can't even tell if any of you are acting strange because you've been replaced or because this group is full of weirdos.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Spellbook. If you happen to have any comments or suggestions, please send us an email at thespellbookshow@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're hungry for more, you can find Mike at thisweekingeek.net, covering a variety of nerdy topics, and Damien on YouTube at Magical Hack Makes for more TTRPG conversation.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.